Hey everybody, and welcome to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast with your host, Kate Tassie. The purpose of this podcast is to share the struggles, achievements, insights, and opinions of diabetics, their loved ones, and the medical professionals that provide them guidance and treatment. These episodes will feature stories that will inspire, dissuade, entertain, and educate. My hope is that with each episode, it will leave you with some degree of comfort, camaraderie, or empathy, whether or not diabetes has ever touched your life in any way thus far. You should know that none of the statements made within this podcast should be construed as medical or legal advice in any way. Any changes made to your diet or diabetes management should be made only after consulting with a medical professional. Now, without further ado, please enjoy the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. My name is Kate Tassie. I have a very special guest with me here today in studio. My mom, Mary Johnston. Say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
And so you might think it's a bit odd that I'm going to read some intro facts about my own mother, but I wanted to make sure I had everything properly noted because she has many a credential to her name. So in addition to being my mom and my primary caretaker all growing up with my type 1 diabetes, along with my dad, she is also a registered nurse. She's been so for 44 years. She has her master's in education and another master's in nursing. 90% of her registered nurse career has been in pediatrics. She worked in the pediatric ICU. She was a nurse manager of 2 outpatient pediatric clinics for children with spina bifida or other neurological conditions. She was a newborn nursery nurse, say that 5 times fast, and a school nurse teacher, and did pediatric nursing clinical instruction for 1 college and 1 university for 3 years. So, with those creds, I won the lottery in terms of who was going to take care of me when I became a diabetic. So, obviously, if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I've interviewed a doctor as well as other diabetics. This is the first time that I'm interviewing someone who has personal experience with type 1 diabetes, intimate experience, but not firsthand experience in experiencing diabetes. And I promise not to say experience too many more times. But someone who's witnessed it. And I think it's important that the diabetes community also talk about the loved ones of those with diabetes because it affects them in pretty significant ways. So I usually start off with lightning round questions. Obviously, those have been geared toward actual diabetics, but I'm going to amend them a bit today to adjust. So, okay, Mom, relationship to type 1 diabetes.
My relationship to it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a parent of a type 1 diabetic.
There you go. And you also took care of students, right?
Yes.
Diabetes.
Over the years, I was a school nurse for 26 years, so over the years, I've had quite a few students with type 1 diabetes.
Okay. You can relax. This is just a casual conversation with all of our listeners. Okay, your biggest misconception that you had about diabetes before living with a type 1 diabetic?
Well, even as a nurse, I just thought that it would be so easy to control it with insulin, which was not the case. There's so many different factors. But that was my misconception that, once we get the insulin in and we, track your nutrition and your activity, definitely 180, from my perceptions of it.
Well, I think that's really important to note because in my experience with medical professionals, most of them, unless their practice is primarily focused on those with diabetes, seem to have that misconception. And it's as if it's this simple math equation of what your blood sugar is, what you're going to be eating, how many amount of carbs, what you want your blood sugar to be, equals how many units of insulin to give. And it's as if their patients who don't have perfect control are seen as just being either bad at math or being lazy or somehow not smart about their illness. But like you said, I think it's really important to point out that it's really rarely as simple as just those factors, although they are the biggest factors.
Right.
There's going to be what kind of activity you've done. Was it aerobic? Was it anaerobic? What the temperature is. For females, what time of the month it is. So I think that was a great answer. Okay, scariest moment for you as the parent or caregiver of a type 1 diabetic.
Okay, well, there were two.
Okay.
One was really scary, and the other one was just feeling scared. So
Okay.
the one that was really scary, I can't remember exactly your age, but I think you were around 7 or 8, and you were sleeping, and we noticed you started twitching.
Ooh.
Which could have been the beginning of having a seizure. So I had some glucose gel, which I rubbed inside your cheek,
Mm-hmm.
and you turned you on your side. And then I went to go get your glucagon injection kit. And by the time, came back into the room, it had stopped.
Okay.
But that was pretty close to me needing to give you a
geez.
glucagon injection.
I don't even remember that, so
No,
I'm
well,
sorry.
You wouldn't.
I'm sorry you have that memory.
But yeah, that was close.
Okay.
That was
And do you
close.
remember the other one?
The other one was sending you off to Penn State University,
Aw.
7 hours away, only being 17 and being a type 1 diabetic. That was
That's fair.
a different type of scary.
Well, as we'll get into a little later on in the episode, I think it probably helped you guys to have that kind of test run with sending me off to sleepaway camp at Claire Barton, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That primed us for,
So as with any parent, of any child, whether they're healthy or not, I'm sure it's very stressful to send them away to college. But yeah, I would imagine there's a large amount of stress when your child has, a potentially fatal illness. Okay, what was your happiest moment for you as a parent or caregiver of a diabetic?
More than one. I can't. I mean, obviously, seeing you become more independent in your care of diabetes and thriving, that made me happy. But to know what you had to go through to get to the levels that you did. The first time you won your national championship in high school for throwing the hammer and the weight throw. Well, I mean, that's an incredible, to be a national champion, even if you didn't have diabetes, is an incredible thing. But knowing you did that, having type 1 diabetes, and then representing the United States in the World Junior Championship in Chile as a high schooler, that was amazing.
Way to butter up the podcast.
Well, no, because we were in a foreign country, and the long plane rides, and it was just amazing that you were able to function at such a high level, and then having you go to Penn State and graduating with like a double major and a minor, and then finishing law school, putting your own law school, your own law business in practice. I mean, that made it seem like all those struggles, were worth it in a way. I mean, not that you wanted to happen, but you were able to be a highly functioning person who had diabetes, but you didn't let diabetes control your life.
And I hope you took some pride in that, because all those accomplishments, those were in large part because of you, and couldn't have happened had it not been for your and Dad's support. So I hope that they're happy moments, not only to see your child do that, but that you can take pride that you contributed to that.
Well, yeah, but
Okay, I'm gonna.
That was a small part.
It's gonna be Crying session. Okay. And so second to last thing, most important thing you've learned as the parent or caregiver of a diabetic.
This is huge. You have to be your child, or if it's an older person, with type 1 diabetes, you have to be their advocate. They're going through this, so they can't see it objectively, and they may not be able to question or do other things. And, even if you have to pester them about it, be their advocate. Ask the doctor questions if they don't. Ask for second opinions. Go, do research and stuff, argue with school. We'll get into the school stuff later, but I mean, argue, nicely, but be insistent upon the best care you can get for your child, and, don't take no for an answer if it's not necessary to take no.
Sure. And I think even if it is an older person that you're taking care of, even if they're perfectly intelligent and capable themselves, I think that's a great point, that they might be in the middle of it and not recognize what needs to be pushed, what needs to be questioned, and to really make sure that they're getting the care that they need to thrive. All right, so last lightning round question. If you could give one piece of advice to the parents of a newly diagnosed type 1 diabetic, what would it be?
Okay, know that every day, within that whole day, there's going to be ups and downs with the glucose control and other issues, especially for younger kids, getting them to cooperate. And don't try to get it perfect. And forgive yourself if you make a mistake. The biggest mistake I was one night, I think you were like 5 or 6, you had diabetes for about a year. I was kind of exhausted because, we had to do checks during the night and everything. So it was your evening dose of insulin. And at that time, the regular and the MPH didn't have different caps on them, so they looked exactly the same.
No.
So I switched your MPH for regular, and I had to call Joslin Diabetes Center because they have physicians on call, and they told me what to do, and I had to check your blood sugar every hour and give you snacks and give you juice, and we got you through it, but. Man, I felt so bad about that. But then it also, made me be more cognizant. And actually, I put red magic marker on the outside of one of them to differentiate. And I checked the labels every time.
You were ahead of the drug company's time of color coordinating differently. No, and I'm sure that's relatable to a lot of other parents of diabetics, as well as diabetics ourselves. I mean, it's a little easier if you're wearing a pump and maybe you give yourself too much and you thought you were going to eat a big meal and then ended up not, and you can just kind of disconnect the pump if it hasn't gone through already. But yeah, back in those days of just the syringe, nowadays they have pens, so it's each type of insulin is a different colored pen. So those safeguards weren't in place back then.
Well, when we first started, you had to have your insulin a half an hour to an hour before you ate. Right. So I gauged it on how much you were going to eat. And as a 4-year-old, how do you make a 4-year-old, or if you have a 2-year-old, how do you make them eat? Now it's much easier with the pumps, but then you're like, come on, because you gauged it for that.
I think not striving for perfection or not expecting perfection and forgiveness are two things that I know I've mentioned before on the podcast, and I mentioned in my book a lot, but it's a huge lesson that I've had to learn for myself. And I never felt as if you guys taught me to try and be perfect, or taught me to be really hard on myself. But when I took on control of it, that's what I absorbed. And so there was a lot of guilt and anger and frustration, and that contributed a lot to the diabetes rebellion or burnout or whatever you want to call it. And I don't think that I ever gave it much thought about how you were feeling, to see my blood sugar be out of control. I mean, how do you remember how soon after I was diagnosed that they told you that it was brittle diabetes?
Well, we had to, because it took over a year for all your cells to not function.
Okay.
Within that first year of diagnosis, you still had some functioning beta cells.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was really into that second year when we knew you didn't have anything left.
Right.
Because they could tell on how your blood sugars were consistently higher, and they had to keep
Right.
increasing your insulin. So then it was like all over the, and I kept a really good log. So we would bring the logs to the doctors, and they're like, you had to be on so much insulin. That's the other thing where I'm saying be an advocate for your child. They base it on your body weight, but I'm telling you, some kids need more, some kids need less. I mean, you are on really high doses of insulin for your body weight. And we had a problem with that when you went to a hospital. You were admitted to a hospital, a local hospital, and they wanted to just strictly give you by body weight. And we kept telling, call Jocelyn. I'm telling you, you need a higher dose. So again, being an advocate for your child, you know more about your child sometimes than the doctors do.
Right. And you're living with it every day. So you're, especially if they're young, you're seeing it more than they ever could recognize those patterns. And you're recognizing things that a doctor wouldn't know. And they would just make these assumptions based off what they've been taught and might not accept that you know what you're talking about because they have the medical degree. I mean, you actually had.
Right. But I'm just saying,
but still, yeah. Okay, great. So let's move into the larger questions. So we talked a little bit about, I was diagnosed when I was 4. Can you just let the listeners know what symptoms did you pick up on that suggested to you that I might have diabetes?
Okay, well, for a while it was tricky because you had just had major neurosurgery 6 weeks before.
Right.
And as a result, you lost 5 pounds, which for a 4-year-old, was substantial. So you were eating a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You've been drinking a lot, and we just thought it was you trying to get the weight back. And you didn't urinate a lot because we didn't find out until after the fact. A few months after that, you went for a bladder study, and you had this huge bladder capacity. So that kind of threw us off because, that wasn't that was one, the triad of symptoms.
Yeah.
So, but at some point, it was probably over several days or so, you became really irritable the night before, and tired. And the next morning you were going to preschool, and it was your picture day, and you wanted to go get your picture done. So I let you go, but I called up a pediatrician, and I also brought home a urine ketone glucose kit. Okay. So I tested your urine in the morning, and surprisingly, this is what threw me off, no glucose, but you were large for ketones, like super large. And I'm like, what is going on? You're eating. It's not like you're not eating, So I picked you up from the preschool, and we went right to the doctor's office. Now, this doctor, want me to just go into the next question?
Yeah.
Once I, all right. So this doctor was ranked number 3 in the state. Really, and I knew him well. I had a lot of confidence in him, but he still did not believe me when I kept saying, I think she has diabetes. He's like, no, look, she's got 2 double ear infections. That's what's causing it. And he couldn't understand why your ketones were high, but, glucose. So I had to actually insist that he do a blood glucose. Had I not done that, he would have sent us home with antibiotics, and probably you would have been in a coma by the next morning, or worse.
Had you told him that you had checked for ketones and that they were large? And
but there was no glucose. So that's what threw him off. It should have been high glucose, too. And it wasn't. But I checked you in the morning. You hadn't eaten since the night before. So your blood sugar at that point probably did come down okay. So, but... So he did, they have a lab in their office, so he did the blood test, and we're waiting in his office. He comes back in. I've never seen his face so ashen. He was like white. He slumped down into his chair, and he said, I can't believe it. You know, she's got to get admitted right away. I think she has diabetes. And he had just diagnosed another child with diabetes the week before. That's why it was like, this is crazy. But it was the spring, and they do find that viral, either the flu or in your case, maybe your ear infections were viral, not necessarily bacterial. They trigger off something genetically, like you may have been predisposed to get maybe type 2 later on, but that's epidemics everywhere. Even in Norway, they've done papers on that. So the springtime is when a lot of kids get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But a lot of people in emergency rooms think it's the flu and they send them home.
Right.
So, you know, and so that's, again, be an advocate. You know your child, you know, what's it going to hurt to get a blood test? Personally, I think every child that comes in with flu symptoms and stuff, you know, they should do, you know, either a blood glucose or urine strep, you know, just to rule that out.
Right.
That should be kind of standard. That's my thought.
Yeah. I mean, that you wouldn't think it would take much, but who knows? Maybe nowadays they are being more proactive about it, since there's so many more people being diagnosed with diabetes, at least in America. So how you mentioned it briefly, and obviously I know because this was my life, but how did it feel going through this and seeing that I was diagnosed with, you know, lifetime incurable disease right after I had had a tumor removed from my spine 6 weeks ago? Like, how are you guys feeling at this point with me and my health, and knowing what you guys as parents would have to take on for the rest of your lives?
Well, I was devastated, more for you as you said, what you're going to go through for the rest of your life. This wasn't like, well, we didn't know you're going to need neurosurgery later on in your life again, but, you know, the neurosurgery, we figured, oh, okay, you came out of that okay, you weren't paralyzed, you know, the tumor is gone. Well, most of it was. Some of it was still in your body. But this was like a 24-hour, you know, no rest type of a condition.
Right.
So that was kind of devastating. And if I wasn't an RN, I think I would be overwhelmed by a parent. You know, just the neurosurgery was overwhelming. You know, that was a major thing that you had to go through and get PT to walk again, right? And then to have this, it really was like shocking, you know, and I'm a nurse, you know, it was still shocking, you know, because you're so young. I mean, you know, it's bad enough if, you know, you're 10 or 12 and you get it, but as a 4-year-old, you don't know what's going on. You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember you guys telling me about, you know, having to chase me around the kitchen table to check my blood sugar. But how was that kind of transition period of getting a 4-year-old to understand what this is, what this means, how serious it is, and everyththing that comes with it?
Well, that took a long time because you called me a lot of names too.
Oh, sorry.
Like, I hate you. You're a bad mommy.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, what do you know? I mean, I'm coming at you with needles. I'm coming at you pricking your finger. You know, for the worst as an RN in pediatrics, 4 and 5-year-olds, their worst fear is needles and things like that. So, you know, that's an occasional thing. You were doing it multiple times a day, so it was like very traumatizing.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. but what helped was, you know, involving you in what I could. Okay. You know, like wiping off the top of the bottle with the alcohol wipe. Yeah. You know, or wiping off your finger to do your blood stick. You know, I mean, different things. You know. And it got more and more and more as you got older, right? You know, but that helped make it a little, even though, you know, I didn't like doing it, at least a part of it, you know, giving you choices as far as for eating too. Okay. You know what I mean? So that, you know, you knew you had to have so many carbs, you knew you had to have protein, but let you choose it when possible, so that, number one, you were going to eat, which was my concern.
Right.
And number two, you felt like you're a part of the decision making instead of me saying, okay, here's this, you've got to eat this, you know. So that was
very smart of you guys to figure that kind of life hack out. Did you guys, I know that you had said before, that private conversation, that in Rhode Island there weren't a ton of resources for you guys, and that's why you eventually found Jocelyn. But did you, when you were first figuring out how to adjust to raising a diabetic and taking care of me and teaching me these things, what kind of resources, obviously understanding this was early into 1988, so a lot has changed since, but what kind of resources did you have at your disposal?
Well, initially, not many. I was very upset, especially as a nurse, too. I mean, I can see them maybe doing that with parents who don't have any medical, health care training. But they were using methods that were like 20 years old. They wanted me to only test your urine, which was ridiculous because that's not accurate. That's like, that urine test is 4 to 6 hours old, even when you're testing it right at that point. That's not showing you what your glucose is in your body at that point. So that's not accurate as far as giving the insulin.
Right.
So it may be all right to test if you have ketones and stuff, but that's not a great thing. So they were just, and they wouldn't let me get a sliding scale. They wanted me to call them every meal, morning and supper, call them either at the hospital or their office. This was a diabetic children's clinic, like the only clinic in the whole state. So this is what happened. The next morning, after we got you home, I call them, and you're waiting to eat breakfast, and you're hungry, you're 4 years old.
Right.
An hour and a half goes by, no response. I had them paged at the hospital, whoever was on call. So I said, oh, the heck with this. I mean, being an RN, I could do this, but, I gave you the insulin that I thought was appropriate, to cover your breakfast.
Jeez.
And I was really livid with them when they finally got back to me. I said, no. I said, you're gonna send me a sliding scale because I can't keep doing this every time. Right. So I did go to one visit at that clinic, and I said, no, there's got to be more that we can do. Right. So I don't remember how I heard about Jocelyn, but, it could have been through my studies as a nurse or, working in the hospital. So I called them up and I said, do you have an orientation or training, for parents and kids with diabetes? And they said yes. And my insurance fortunately covered it, but I'm sure they have like scholarships for, people that don't have insurance. Now it's only a weekend, but at the time it was a whole week.
Wow.
And Dad would come, leave work for a little while too, and come, and they would, because he worked in the same city. It was in Boston, Massachusetts. Right. And he would come over for a little bit and they would give him some training. But you and I stayed for a whole week, and you had separate classes. Me and Dad had separate classes, and it was so informative as to how to best take care of you. And I really understood it more. Even though when I was an RN, I had at that point never taken care of a child with diabetes.
Right.
I mean, it was foreign to me too.
Right.
Maybe I could understand it better, but I didn't have a clue. So it was really marvelous. And they had doctors on call. I mean, they will literally get back to you in less than an hour. Yeah. Usually in less than a half an hour. Yeah. 24 hours a day. So I felt much more comfortable, doing that. Yes, it was 50 miles away, and we had to go there every 3 months, but it was well worth it. And that's my point. If you're not happy with the care you're getting, or they're not a diabetes specialist, which a lot of places that you live, it might just be your primary, see if you can go that extra mile, even if it does take an hour or two to go, because sometimes you might have to go maybe twice a year, but in the meantime, you could do that by telephone. And even now in today's age, you could do it by Zoom calls. It's worth it to feel more confident taking care of your child, and it's worth it for your child's health.
Right.
I mean, you were brittle as it was. You would have been
Yeah.
crazy brittle with checking, only your urine and trying to figure out your. I mean, it was like ridiculous. When one state over, they were doing blood glucose.
Yeah.
So
that's mind-boggling to me that they would want to take on that responsibility of hearing from you every single time you needed to give me insulin. But Jocelyn, I could go on and on about them. I called the on-call doctor when I thought I had COVID, and someone got back to me within minutes, and they're fantastic. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about trying to force a 4-year-old into compliance with her diabetes. How did you deal with the fact that you and I have inherited your dad's sweet tooth and the fact that I wanted to? I'm sure I want to have candy just like the rest of kids my age.
Right.
So what were some tricks? I do remember, you would give me like a bite-sized Snicker if I did a soccer match. But were there any other things? I mean, there weren't too many sugar-free candy alternatives at that time.
No, they weren't. But, I mean, they did have some. But the thing is, I would ask the teachers in advance when you got into regular school if they were going to have, like now with the healthy eating,
right.
They don't do that anymore. But they used to have, like, Valentine's Day. They would bring snacks or candies and things. Somebody's birthday would bring in. So I would ask in advance to know when those dates were coming up. And either I would give you your own sugar-free candy, or if I knew what the snack was, maybe you could have half of a cupcake, and figure that out. Because at the time, you were only getting 2 insulin shots. There was no coverage at lunch. So, I figured, what, I'll just cover that at supper if you're still high, or have you go and run around after school, burn some of that off.
Yeah.
So I tried with that, but it was even Jocelyn changed their tune when you were around 10. Remember they were saying a carb is a carb is a carb?
Yes.
Where they were strict before. And they showed a sugar-free ice cream sandwich. I'll never forget that. And a regular ice cream sandwich. Same amount of carbs.
Yeah.
So they said, obviously don't substitute your good food for that, but you can plan a snack. And usually that's what would happen if we knew you were going to do a lot of activity, let you have that treat.
Oh, yeah.
Before.
I know carb counting was like a kind of a mind-blowing revelation because I remember them saying it like 15 grams in an Oreo and 15 grams in a piece of bread. Obviously some of the simple sugars, you might digest it a little differently, but hearing that was very...
and they also cautioned this doesn't mean you can eat ice cream sandwiches every day for your meal.
Yeah. You hear what you want to hear.
Lacking.
So in terms of, we talked a little bit about how nervous you were when I went away to Penn State and how kind of a practice run was Claire Barton. If you could explain how you guys found out about Claire Barton camp and what that effect had on you the first time you let me go, and then what changes you might have seen in me after I went in terms of my understanding the disease and happiness or independence or any of that stuff.
Well, actually, Jocelyn gave us pamphlets because they have a boys' camp right down the road from the Clara Barton camp. Right. It's in Uxbridge, Mass, I think.
Oxford, I think?
Uxbridge, something like that. Anyways, they gave us the pamphlet, and we read it, and they came up with this new thing that was a family weekend in October. To get families to go, as a whole family, even your brother came, you stay there overnight and everything, and it's a little mini camp where, the staff would take the kids and do things with them as far as teaching them how to maybe, do their own blood sugar check or teaching them about nutrition and stuff. And we would get little mini classes too, and then they'd have activities for the siblings. And it would give you an introduction of, you got to see the camp, you got to see the setup, you got to meet the staff, and preparation for the real camp, because the real camp is scary for parents.
Yeah.
It's 2 weeks overnight, and you cannot call and talk to your children. You can write them a letter. They can write you a letter, which by the time you get it, a whole week is fine. But
well, maybe there's emails now.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Then maybe they let you email. Yeah. Well, I don't know. That's like talking.
Yeah.
So the reason is they want your children to be independent. They want them to, function. And if they're talking to mom and dad, especially if they're young, you started when you were, 8, I think?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because you went when you were 7 that fall before. You had just turned 8. And then that summer you went, they're going to be crying on the phone. I want to come home. So it is a marvelous camp, camp. And you did so much activity.
Oh, yeah.
They had anything and everything you ever wanted. Even if you weren't athletic, they had arts and crafts things. And
theater, everything,
But they also taught you a lot, too.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you had, except for going to the clinic, you had never met a child with diabetes.
Right.
Everywhere, in all the sports activities you were in the ballet, gymnastics classes we put you in, everything. No one, so it was nice in a way, I think, for you to meet other girls
absolutely.
with diabetes and, talk freely amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I think it's changed so dramatically nowadays, especially with social media and apps like Beyond Type 1, where there's an actual online diabetic community. But beforehand, I had never met another child with diabetes. And I do remember maybe a few times afterwards or during those summers, in between the 6 years of me going, that I went on a few, like maybe play dates or a sleepover or two with some of my friends from camp. But then afterwards, during high school, again, I don't think I really interacted with anyone who had diabetes. So, yeah, it's at that time, it was crucial to me understanding that I'm not so different, that there are other kids who are going through the same thing. But what did you have any hesitation? Did that first introduction weekend really make a difference to change your minds if you were hesitant?
No, it gave me a lot more confidence about sending you there, because they have a doctor there and at least one nurse all the time.
Oh, yeah. And
sometimes
like
more than one nurse. Yeah. They've got, they're well staffed. It was difficult, though. You could call the staff, I believe, and see how they could tell you how you're doing. Okay. But the only time I did get a call from the staff was you had an allergic reaction from a bee sting.
Oh, I remember that.
That was not good. But you only had a body rash. It did last over a week. But it never got worse, so I knew they were handling it by giving you Benadryl and stuff. So I let you stay. But just not knowing for 2 weeks how you're doing, that's why you need to gradually give your children a little more independence.
Yeah.
Age dependent. You know what I mean? Because if you wait until later, it's really hard to separate. And it's hard for the child to separate because they're so used to you doing everything for them that,
it can be a major adjustment. So did you, 8 years old, I wouldn't think you would have let me on a lot of sleepovers anyways, but after I went to sleepaway camp, did you start being a little bit more relaxed about letting me stay at other people's houses?
To a degree. If I didn't know the parent that well, and I didn't know if I could trust them, I was reluctant to. I let you go there and stay up until they were going to sleep, till midnight or something, and I would come and, if you weren't able to give your own insulin at that point, I would come and give you your insulin, when you were going to eat, and then let you, stay there. But if I knew the other parents and they were willing, when you could do your own insulin and check your own, by then you were checking your blood sugar all the time anyways. You were doing that when you were in second grade, because when I put you in regular school, which we'll talk about later, but you know what I mean? So it wasn't like it was just the responsibility of, I needed to teach them, they gave him an emergency sheet, the symptoms of highs and lows and what to do. And I also sent you with your glucagon kit, I believe, in your backpack, just in case. Not that they were going to give it, because that's a lot of responsibility. But, if they had to call EMS, they could maybe get there earlier than I was going to get there. And maybe they could give you the glucagon. So it just depended on how much I trusted the other parents.
Well, I think it was also helpful to feeling accepted that you did make the effort to kind of educate the parents on what to recognize. And I feel like even my friends didn't treat me as an outsider. They legitimately wanted to know what I was feeling, or if they could help, or what they should do. So even when I did go to elementary school, I think the kids were eager to push me in the wheelchair down the hallway to the nurse's office to get out of class and hop on the back of the wheelchair. But I think it was helpful for my adjustment and my acceptance to have you make it that much easier by taking the time to make sure that the parents were educated as well.
Well, I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable having you there either. Sure. I wanted them to, treat you as normal, and not like an eggshell, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want them to feel like they had to hover. You're going to be with your friends, and then you've got the parent standing there hovering all the time. So, and your friends knew you enough by then that they knew if you weren't acting right, they could at least, get a hold of the parent and ask for more help.
Yeah. So when I know that that you've mentioned some struggles with school administration and getting the proper nurses, or getting nurses there full time. So why don't you explain a little bit about the struggles that you guys faced getting the proper care for me in the public school?
Okay, so we never really got through about the daycare and stuff till we did the sleepovers. But daycare is a big problem. If you're a working parent, where do you put, your child? Who do you let take care of a child with diabetes? In the beginning, I had my grandparents watch you, because I was only working a half a day. But then I got offered a full-time school nurse position, which are very hard to come by, so I didn't want to give that up. So we had to find a place that would take care of you all day, and we were very lucky that there was it was like a daycare and early elementary school combined. They went up to grade 2, I believe.
Right.
So you were, I think, 5 at that point. And you were there for kindergarten and first grade.
Yep.
And then the reason I was comfortable with them was the couple that owned it, their adult daughter had type 1 diabetes as a child, and she was the teacher. Her and the brother were teachers there.
I did not realize that.
No.
I have no memory.
So they all were very familiar on, blood glucoses and, how to treat you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really lucked out, but that's not always the case.
Right.
So, that was good. But then, we wanted to get you back into regular school so you were near kids in your neighborhood and you could develop more friends. So I started 9 months before contacting the school system, contacting the special ed director, telling them that you were going to be coming, and I needed to have a nurse there every day at lunchtime, because at that time you still weren't doing lunch insulin, so, but you needed to check your glucose. And I knew it was going to be very difficult to get a full-time nurse, because the city we live in, they like have the nurses spread out all over the place. So, but at least every day for a couple of hours, right, before lunch. So your particular school, that was your neighborhood school, the school nurse only came there on a Friday afternoon, once a week. That was it. So I said, no, this is not acceptable. So the administrator was the most obnoxious, negative person I've ever met, who actually swore at me in one of our conversations.
Whoa.
He has since, the year after he got fired, it says he left, but I think he got fired. So he gave me such a hard time. He wanted you to go across town, to be bused across town to a school where there was a full-time nurse, because there were several kids with medical disabilities at that school. So they had to, pretty severe probably, so they had to have a school nurse there. I said, no, you are going to be in your home school with your friends. So I ended up, because I did that request, and by federal law, just so you know, if you're a parent, if you request your child to have certain services, and diabetes comes under the federal protection of the ADA, so you can request, it's called Section 504, but it's a 504 plan. And if you have like a doctor's statement saying that they have this condition and that, they're eligible for the 504 plan, they have to develop a plan which includes nursing care, which includes accommodations, in case you have to retake a test because you were low at the time, or extra time to finish, bathroom privileges, eating snacks, it goes on and on and on. And by law, the city or town you live in has to respond and start developing that plan within 40 days. Doesn't mean it's going to be done in 45 days. So this was months went by and nothing was done. So I called the State Department of Education and I complained about them. I put in a complaint. And they were on their case, and they were still giving the Department of Education a hard time.
Wow.
So I hired an educational lawyer. Now, not every parent can afford to do this. Right. It ended up costing me like $1,000. And at that time in 90,
early 90s.
That was a lot. So, but as a result, they hired 3 nurses in the town, which was good for the schools. But yours, at least you had a nurse for 2 hours a day, every day around lunchtime.
Good.
It wasn't ideal, but it was certainly better to keep you in your own home school to be with kids, so that you could socialize.
Had you known about the 504 plan and your protections under the ADA? Had you known about it
Only
beforehand,
because I was a school nurse.
Oh,
I wouldn't have known that. So that's what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Your child has, definitely certain provisions that the town has to accommodate. And the American Diabetes Association has a wonderful sample 504 plan. Just Google ADA 504 plan or Section 504 plan. They might have it. It's wonderful. It's in a PDF. You may not need everything that's in there, but it's a great starting point. And it tells you all the different accommodations that the child can have. So it took 9 months, and finally, just before you were going to come in, that September, we got it straightened out.
Wow!
But you have rights and your child has rights. Yeah. So you sometimes have to be pushy about it. And, as I said, don't take no for an answer. If there's another option. So once we got that settled, the nurses were great. Yeah. Until you got to high school. And then we were trying to prepare you throughout those 4 years so it wouldn't come as a shock, at the end for you to go to college and, have to take care of yourself completely. Yeah. So we were getting you more and more independent. And as I recall, you were complaining about her because she was very controlling and she wanted to know every single blood glucose and she wanted you to come. But we had a talk with her, the both of us, I think. Okay. And then she kind of relaxed a little. Yeah. I mean, I can see her point. She's nervous too. She doesn't want something to happen to you, and then she could have avoided it by knowing, what your numbers were. Right. But
well, nowadays I think, especially with the continuous glucose monitors, you can have access as not only a parent, but I believe as a nurse to the patient or the child's blood sugars. Yes. So you can just pull it up on your phone and you get alerted when they're high or low. So, obviously back then she didn't have any access to that kind of information. No. But I think that was probably a bad fit for a more hovering nurse to be working in a high school.
Yeah, she ended up going to elementary school, which I think that was more suited for her type of personality. Right. She was a little too nervous.
Yeah, well, I was also, as you now know,
Yes.
as me being
found
an
out.
adult, right, that I'm sure that you recognized when I was a teenager, my just sense of, being a teenage girl and smart talking you, period, but also rebelling against my diabetes and being more concerned about my weight. And then I had the whole kind of internal battle between wanting to look attractive, but then also being a strength athlete and having contradicting priorities and goals as to what my body should look like and how much it should weigh. So when do you recall first recognizing that I was rebelling a bit with my checking my blood sugars or doing insulin or eating poorly?
Well, occasionally I would see that there was a wrapper. Like you must not have thrown it away. There was a wrapper in your
Or,
wastebasket with
something. Yeah.
Not forbidden, but really junk food.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know.
Yeah.
You hit it very well. I
Wow.
didn't really know until as an adult when
Wow.
you were doing your book. I mean, when you got to be high school age, the Jocelyn physician would have you meet with her privately. So I didn't know a lot of the stuff you talked.
So you would just wait in the waiting room?
Yep.
Oh.
She would talk to me first.
Okay.
And then when she did the exam, she would talk to you.
Oh.
So you may have told her some things, but
Right.
she didn't necessarily.
Would she share with you the results of like my A1C?
Oh yes, that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, but even, well, probably it wasn't till you were in the ICU and you're late teens, or you were in college at that point.
For what? The DKA?
Yeah.
No, that was actually after I finished law school.
Was it?
That was
There wasn't
2009.
one that it was earlier? You were in there twice. So you were in...
No, I, at least my memory, I did my senior year. Remember, I lost like 40 pounds in between.
But I thought that was because you weren't.
Yeah, and that's
anymore.
well, no, I was still doing track. That was the fall of Junior Worlds in Chile. But then by my senior indoor track meet, usually they're around February, I was a good 40 pounds lighter than I had been by maybe July. And I remember you going with me to Jocelyn, and there was some slight suggestion that maybe it was exercise bulimia, because I had started eating differently and stopped eating red meat and was doing a lot more aerobic exercise. But even then, I was completely fabricating my blood sugar logs. I would have my only food for a meal would be like the semi-sweet chocolate chips. And and I would, completely fabricate what I ate, what my blood sugars were, what insulin I had. So I remember us kind of having almost like an intervention at that point. But yeah, I still hid the real deep-seated hidden truth about me experiencing the diabulimia, which I don't even think was a term at the time.
I don't think they even knew.
Yeah, and I don't recall, maybe you might remember, but do you remember, and I'm not blaming Jocelyn at all, but do you recall them ever citing any kind of mental health resources in terms of its relation to diabetic burnout or rebellion or anything like that?
No.
Yeah, I don't either. And I do believe they have those sorts of things now. And there's obviously a lot of literature that's being written and also research being done on whatever you want to call it. I know that it's not, a DSM term, diabulimia, but I think they call it reduction in insulin for the purpose of weight loss or something like that. But I don't know that anyone really at that time that I was going through that, which was the early 2000s, really understood very well a young woman's battle with type 1 diabetes, with their weight, with pressures on their appearance, and this seeming, awesome solution, which is to shorten your lifespan and potentially kill yourself in order to lose some weight. And, obviously I'm being facetious there.
That's not to say they didn't have those people on staff, but I don't
Right.
think they thought you were maybe at that point
That's
to
true.
even
I know
broach it with me.
I know that my doctor.
You didn't have a very good relationship with that other
No,
doctor.
and she didn't have a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings.
Well, the first one,
manner-wise.
but when you got to be a teenager, they
Right,
switched
teenage.
doctors.
But I knew that she and I both knew without saying so much that we both knew that I was lying through my teeth. But it wasn't until my current doctor, who really just did a kind of come to Jesus, you either show up for your appointment or I'm not prescribing you insulin, that really...
What was your A1C, 14?
Yeah. And that was when she finally could get me in the office. And that was, a period of time in my adult life where I would push off my doctor's appointments with her by saying I either had a trial or some court appearance, and so I had to reschedule. So who knows what it really was at its worst. But, it's hard, I think, for any child going through any kind of disordered eating to confess as much to their parents, but then you've got the additional feeling of guilt that it's your diabetes, and you do feel like you have to be perfect, and you have to, if you don't reach stability, then you're failing in some way, or, there's something wrong with you. And so there's a lot of pressure that I don't think, I wasn't experiencing from you. It's not as if you were demanding these unreasonable A1Cs or blood sugars, and you did give me a lot of independence and tried to teach me how to think and advocate for myself. I just, I'm not sure anything that could have been said or done at the time would have pulled me out of it. But I certainly wish if there was a way to go back and tell myself earlier. When I did tell you, when I was writing my book and you read the full extent of what I had done and how that led to my dozens of surgeries as an adult, how did you feel? What were your feelings about it?
First of all, I was really shocked
Yeah.
that it had been going on that long, too,
Mhm.
reaching back into high school, But I just felt bad because, I thought, had I known, maybe I could have changed it earlier, and prevented some of these complications, But,
Yeah.
hindsight's a great thing, but,
Right. And again, I don't think even if there were some...
But at that point, you were pretty independent.
Yes.
I mean, you were over 18. What
Right.
am I going to do? Say,
Yeah, and
I mean, there's only so much I could have, said things, but I couldn't.
And
really
I was a
have
teenager.
made
I wasn't going to listen to my mom. You've been telling me what to do my whole life. And then you've also been, my nurse telling me what to do with my diabetes since I was 4. I'm not going to, fine, whatever. Yeah, okay, I'll get better. But even my doctors,
Right.
For a while couldn't pull me out of it, even though they didn't really, I don't think they knew the extent of what I was doing, but they knew my blood sugars were certainly out of control. So I apologized for if I made you feel at any point that you didn't do enough or you could have done something differently, because honestly, even if there was like some magic time machine and I could go back and tell myself, hey, if you do this, which really isn't going to make much of a difference in your social life or your physical appearance, and is going to lead to severe proliferative diabetic retinopathy. You'll almost go blind. You won't be able to close your hands very well without severe pain. You're going to get lumps in your breasts that are going to scare you into thinking you have breast cancer. You're going to have nerve pain that keeps you up at night. You're going to have nerve damage to your heart that's going to make your heart rate go up and your blood pressure go down, and you're going to pass out. You know, if I had told myself these will happen if you go down this path, I'm not sure that I would have done anything
maybe
at that time.
At that point, you might
Right.
not have. You might have said, "It's not going to happen to me."
Right.
You know.
So,
The
you know,
teen brain.
yeah.
And the teen brain goes into like your your early 20s.
Oh,
It doesn't just end at
definitely.
18.
Yeah.
Like everybody else, it can happen to them.
So I don't want you to ever think that you could have done a better job with me, because, you know, I'm not claiming that I'm perfect now, then, or at any point in my life, but I do believe that you couldn't have been better as my healthcare advocate, as my nurse, as my mom, any of that. You did absolutely phenomenally. So, switching gears a little bit, do you think, since you didn't really treat anyone with diabetes before I was diagnosed, do you think that raising me helped you in your career as a school nurse and healthcare educator?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you were, because I was at that school when you were still fairly young. I was at a really big school. There was 500 kids at this elementary school. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened, and they moved in from different places. They were not. They all moved in at the same time. A boy and a girl in 4th grade, and a kindergartner, and they all had diabetes, and they were all on insulin pumps.
Oh, wow!
So none of them had CGIs. That was before CGIs. So I had 3 kids coming in at different times, because 2 of them had one lunch, the other one had another lunch, and I had to, check their blood sugars 3 times a day during the day, and give them all their lunch insulin, help them with that, and count all their carbs.
Wow, yeah.
And in addition, I would have 30 to 45 kids a day in my office for other, injuries and illnesses. So it was insane. So if I didn't have all that knowledge and I went to, again, Jocelyn has a wonderful program for school nurses.
Oh.
You go there for 2 full days, I believe. And, they teach you everything about, like now probably CGIs too, but they tell you about insulin pens and insulin pumps, and they talk to you about nutrition and carb counting. So I had gone to several of those too. So that helped me also, because you were never on a pump when you were
right.
young,
I didn't go on until
so that was new to me.
Done with college.
And later on, and I've probably had over 12 kids, with diabetes that were on pumps, and some were on pens initially. But even one parent had me go to the clinic at this diabetes group. And my school let me out for the half day, and they taught me how to do that pump, because it was a newer pump that I wasn't familiar with. Yeah. So, you can really get the school nurse involved, into your child's care. The more they can get involved, the more confident they're going to be in, knowing the child's equipment and knowing what to do for them.
Yeah.
So, that really helped. But there are some school nurses that don't have a clue, and that's unfortunate for the parents. That really is. Yeah, that's a detriment. So you may have to educate the nurses. You know what I mean? You may have to go there and speak with them. That's what I used to do. and I used to let parents come in when I was a school nurse. I would have them come in the week before school, which I didn't really have to be there the whole week before school, but I thought it was easier for them and easier for me, and we'd have a good school year by doing this. And I would literally block out a couple of hours. They would bring in all the child's equipment, and we'd go over the doctor's orders, the sliding scale, and so we'd be all set so that by the time day one started, we were ready to go.
Right.
And my suggestion to parents is get a shoe box. Those plastic shoe boxes, they're like $1 at the dollar store. Put in extra juice packs, several, couple. Put in extra snacks. Put in treatment for whatever you treat for low blood sugars. Right. And have the teacher keep it either like in a cupboard that she has or in her desk, so that also the substitute teachers know too. Put a note, have the child's emergency information, their 504 plan there for the subs, and they always have a subfolder, and tell them where the extra supplies are. Because inevitably, I knew from experience when I had taken care of kids with diabetes as a school nurse, they forgot to pack their snacks. They forgot to pack the juices. So I'm stuck. I used to buy it on my own and have juices in my office just so that I wouldn't be stuck like that. But if you have an extra set, and then the teacher can let you know when, they're running out, and you as a parent should write down the expiration date of the snacks, write down the expiration of the juices so you can replenish them. I even had, in our school, we had like a room that was the art room and the music room. It was like a combined thing for itinerants. So I would even have the parents give us an extra box with just one of each for them, Yeah. And the children, they wherever they went, they would bring their backpack so that they had their stuff, with them.
Great idea.
So, but I wouldn't have, if I didn't have all that experience, as I said, if they don't choose to inform themselves as school nurses, then, the parents are at a disadvantage. So you be their teacher if you have to,
Now, obviously you had the advanced education specific to my needs, even if you didn't have the experience with raising a diabetic prior to me or taking care of one in the schools. And I know that it's easy to look back now and think of what you wish you would have had in raising me, especially as it pertains to like the online diabetic community. It just wasn't in existence then. But is there anything that you wish you would have known in raising me that could have helped raise a type 1 diabetic, or you wish you had had access to back in the, late 80s, early 90s?
Well, I mean, if I had access to the technology you have today, it wasn't until you were much older that we even started doing 3 injections a day.
Right.
And that's how far back, you think this is just, it's always been like that.
Right.
I mean, you were on 2 injections a day for many years. And then it wasn't until later they started noticing that if you did multiple injections, you could control it a little better. So then we started with like the lunch, but so now with the CGIs and the insulin pumps, within reason, can be under a tighter control that you could ever get with, and we didn't even have insulin pens. This was just all insulin syringes and the vials.
And now there's microdosing. You can give yourself 1/10 of a unit of insulin, and you can do it. It kind of blew my mind reading Sugar Surfing by, I think it's Dr. Ponder, saying that, hey, you can microdose in between meals if you see it going up. Give yourself a tiny dose just to stop it from going up. And it kind of just
because in the beginning when the pumps came out, you couldn't give another bolus for 2 hours. That was the thought. So that's what I'm saying. There's so many advances coming out that at least make it easier and maybe better in the long run as far as prevention of long-term complications, if you can keep that. Actually, I just read, because I get a newsletter for doctors and nurses, and they came out with a stronger warning for they want to keep type 1 diabetics, especially the children, in tighter control. I think they originally said 7.5, and now they're saying they want them below 7.
Wow. Well,
that's pretty tight. No, but I mean, like I say, in the long run, it's going to prevent a lot of,
a good goal to have. Yeah. But again, keeping in mind,
it's a child.
It's a child.
The growth, they have growth spurts. They have,
Some are going to be more insulin resistant. Right. Your hormones are going to change over time. And it's okay if you don't reach that. If you're striving for it, you're making good efforts towards that goal, it's okay if you don't reach it or if you mess up or, if you backslide, just keep back at it and try and do better next time.
Right. But any improvement, even a slight improvement, is better than the last time.
And it's also dangerous to go drop too quickly. Yeah. No, but to drop your A1C too quickly can lead to like a heart attack and a lot of bad things. Yeah. So I think it was really helpful to give that advice towards the caregivers to, be kind to yourselves and your expectations of what you can do for your child or your loved one. So is there anything that you are hoping for the future of the diabetic community, including, for the loved ones and caregivers? Is there anything you'd like to see happen in the future besides a cure, obviously? Right.
No, but I'm just saying, like, the technology really helped. If you think about what we have now and what I could have had when you were 4.
Right.
It would have made life a lot easier on both of us. I would have been chasing around doing, blood glucose sticks 10 times a day.
Yeah, but, now people are getting fatigue from seeing their numbers constantly, too. Right. So there's, there's no perfect system of it.
But I'm just saying it's easier on the caretakers, not necessarily the person with the diabetes. It's like the more information they have, they can make better informed decisions as far as giving you a bolus or changing your basal rate, where I could,
But who knows? Maybe if you're a parent who is worrying about perfection and you're looking at your kid's app like 50 times a day.
Well, that's where you have to back off. Right. You have to back off because I had 2 types of parents. One, I had to call them every time I did the blood sugar, even if it was normal. So that was like a bit much. But, the child was like diagnosed less than a year, so I mean, you're going to be worried. You can't say, don't be worried,
Right.
But the other one was like, don't call me unless you, had to treat them or it's so high we need to give them, a bolus, which I had the sliding scale too. They were just very, they were so used to it that it wasn't going to worry them because they had confidence in me. Again, different story if you have a nurse that doesn't really know what they're doing, then I would want to know.
Yeah.
But, like you say, every day within that day, there are so many ups and downs and things happen, like we may have had, I gave you less insulin because you were going to go swimming and then suddenly there was like a thunderstorm and you didn't go swimming that day. And then, they were playing catch up, or, your blood sugar's fine. And then suddenly, the temperature goes up 30 degrees and your blood sugar is soaring high or it's steady for a little while and then suddenly the temperature drops 40 degrees and in the winter you should have a terrible time going low every time the weather went down. So there's a lot of things beyond your control. You can only control as much as you can and the rest you have to let go or you'll drive yourself crazy.
Right.
And you'll drive your children crazy too. I mean, it would be nice to have them get out of that, and reach adulthood and not have any complications. But I think it's the rare person that even if they're in great control, doesn't end up.
Yeah, especially, we're living so much longer nowadays.
Well, no, but not even that. It's the age that you got it. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you were an adult and you got type 2, or you're
Right.
an adult that got type 1, your body, think about it, your body was
That's
only
true.
4 years old. You were, you still had
But
another
yeah.
8 to 12 years of growth in your body.
Right.
So there's only so much you can do.
Yeah. But diabetics didn't used to live that long.
Right,
so,
true.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. With the advances, it's definitely a better world, and
Absolutely.
and a healthier world.
Right.
As we get through each generation, um, you're healthier for longer periods of time than you were way back when.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember our friend that came over who had the type 1 diabetes when you were just diagnosed.
Yeah.
They were boiling syringes in a pan all the time. They
Right.
didn't even have plastic syringes
Right.
for him. It was all glass, and they didn't have blood glucose monitors. All they did was do the urine, and
Right.
I think he had it from when he was 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really. So my hope is that whatever can make it easier for you and easier for your child, but don't forget, they're a child. Let them enjoy life. I mean, we put you into so many different activities. At one point, you were in 3 sports at the same time.
Yeah.
That but they've got to live. They've got to be a child.
Mm-hmm.
And you may sit there on the sidelines and cringe, like, oh no, they're going to go low, but let them experience what they want to experience, and plan as much as you can.
Yeah.
And have the equipment ready in case things go sour. But to deny them those opportunities really affects their development, because they already feel. Sorry, I have a cough coming up. They already feel different, and if you don't let them do the normal childhood things, and the normal adolescent things, they're going to feel even more different, and that's just going to stay with them for a while. Let them have as normal a childhood as possible.
And I'm sure it would have maybe helped if you had access to the online community, not only to ask questions, but to get moral support. Do you feel like it would have been easier for you guys if you had other caregivers or other parents that you could have chatted with about the experience?
If I wasn't a nurse, yes.
Okay.
Right. Because it's my experience wasn't the normal experience, because I was comfortable. Not comfortable because I'd never taken care of somebody with diabetes, but I was comfortable as far as the medical aspects and knowing the information and knowing what to do.
Or being able to access that information.
Right. But as a new parent with, a child with diabetes, definitely it would help to have someone that went through it already.
Sure.
But, so in that respect, things are easier because they do have more resources. They do have more access. I hope it just continues, that it becomes, easier, when you look at even 100 years ago, I mean, it's a whole different world now.
Is. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing a phenomenal job, especially at a time where, it wasn't like you said 100 years ago, but it still was light years different from what's available now. So, if there's another parent or caregiver who wants to ask you a question or chat with you about your experiences, can they reach out to you?
Yes. I can give you my email address, but in the subject line, put in T1 Diabetes Podcast, so I'll know it was from this podcast, because I don't look at junk mail or open up spam mail. I mean, I'll look at my junk file, but
okay. So you're Mary J112 at Verizon.net.
Yes.
You want to send that there? Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Mom. Thanks for coming out all this way to join me on the podcast.
No problem.
And Thanks to everyone again for listening to another episode of the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. I hope you'll tune in for additional episodes and make sure to not only rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening, but also feel free to shoot me a comment or an email as to suggestions for future episodes that you'd like to hear. So thanks again. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon, talk to you soon, Zoom to you soon. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. Tune in to future episodes by logging on to phunkydiabeticpodcast.com, and that's funky with a PH. On the website, you'll find links to follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and can submit questions, comments, and suggestions for future topics. You'll also find links on the website that will enable you to listen to, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Remember, none of the opinions expressed in this episode should be construed as medical or legal advice. Please consult a medical professional before making any change to your diet or diabetic healthcare regimen. I hope you'll be well, stay safe, and keep listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast.